It's 9 o'clock. This is Sky News. Welcome to our new show, Beth Rigby Interviews. And as you can see, it's a bit different tonight because I'm on assignment in India with the Prime Minister. And earlier today, I interviewed him about Partygate and the prospects of more fines. We'll have all of that coming up soon. But before that, let me tell you about what else we have on the show. Fighting for her father's freedom, the daughter of a British-U.S. national jailed in Iran tells me her family feels abandoned. Roxanne Tabhaz claims the Foreign Office promised her father Morad's release along with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe last month. So, what went wrong during the deal to release those British nationals, and can this family ever be reunited? And I'll be interviewing the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, in post during the start of the pandemic, part of a hugely successful vaccine rollout, but forced to resign after breaking his own social distancing guidelines. Will Boris Johnson still have his backing if more Partygate fines emerge? Those interviews recorded back in Westminster, but here in India, the Prime Minister has travelled 4,000 miles, thinking perhaps he could escape Partygate. But back home, there have been issues today in Parliament, and this is what he had to say about all of that. Crucially, he told me he feels he has nothing to hide. Prime Minister, I do want to ask you about India and trade, but I'm going to have to ask you about events at home, because things are very live and very difficult for you back in London. Why did you perform a huge U-turn today and decide to drop an attempt to delay a vote about investigating you by the Privileges Standards Committee?
The most important thing is that we allow the investigation by the Met to continue, and I think all other and to conclude, and then for Sue Gray to make her final report. And what I decided is that, you know, if the opposition really want to focus on this, and your
own MPs,
that's fine. I'm afraid it wasn't a Conservative motion, as far as I can remember.
No, but you were clearly worried about what Conservative MPs were going to do.
I think it's very important that nobody should say that we're trying to avoid scrutiny, and I don't want to avoid scrutiny. And
so why did you try and block the vote?
Because what I don't want to do is to have endless discussion about this when we don't know the conclusion of the
but the Labour amendment doesn't start the inquiry until the Met investigation's concluded, so that is completely illogical.
We just need to get the thing concluded. If people want further conversation about that, I don't want to in any way to dissuade them. I happen to think that, you know, I've made my point. I apologise very much for the FPN that I received. We've taken steps to change things in number 10, but we need to focus, frankly, on the things that matter to the people of this country directly now.
Okay.
How to make sure that we continue to have jobs, growth,
and
how we tackle the cost of energy.
You were worried about
a
Conservative rebellion,
weren't you? I think what I felt was people were saying, look, this looks as though we're trying to stop stuff coming out. I didn't want that. I didn't want people to be able to say that. I don't want this thing endlessly to go on. But if you know, I have absolutely nothing, frankly, to hide here.
Nothing to hide.
No, and let's. But if that is what the opposition want to talk about, that's fine.
Okay.
What I want to talk about is the point of this trip, which is to get. Well, come on. Let's do it now.
I've got some more questions on this fast, but I have I've only got a few minutes, so let's
now 11,000 jobs just from
and we'll come on to that. Steve Baker, who is a key ally of yours, helped you get elected, a key Brexiteer, said in the Commons today, the PM should now be long gone. He should know the gig is up. That must hurt.
Well, you know,
Steve Baker.
I understand people's feelings. I don't think that that's the right thing to do. I think we've got to wait for the conclusion of the report, and perhaps I could say a bit more then. That's what I said. In the meantime, what I would like to do is get on with taking the country forward, making sure that we deal with the immediate problems that we face. And I'm particularly proud of some of the things that are happening on this trip.
You said that you have nothing to hide, but you are also under investigation for up to 4 or 5 events you were involved in. Up to 5 more events.
I can't comment on that.
I know you can't, but
Beth,
you might have more fines. You do accept that.
Beth, you're going to have to wait to the conclusion of the report.
When I ask you, yes.
In the meantime, you promised to get on to the. I think people will hear. Well, you did promise. Did promise to get on to the substance of this trip.
And I think Ben from the BBC did 7 minutes on Partygate, and I'm sure I haven't done as much as that. So
well, this isn't the kind of competition to see who can do more.
I'm just saying.
Why don't you get on to the subject of the trip?
I would just like to ask you this. You said on the plane last night when I said, are there any circumstances in which you might feel that your position is unsustainable or you might have to resign? Are there any circumstances? And you said nothing springs to mind.
I said to you, and I'm sure you could elaborate some for the benefit of your viewers. But I think what I want to do, you could extemporize on. What I want to do is get on with the job which I was elected to do.
But you said,
and that's what we're doing.
But you also said,
and that's what we're focused on.
But you also said that you wanted to get on with things that matter to voters. Do you think that the issues around rule breaking at number 10 doesn't matter to voters?
No, I don't.
And
I apologise for the things. I apologise deeply for the things we got wrong. I came to the House on Tuesday, made a 2-hour statement. I did another half an hour or more, I think, on Wednesday. I believe there's been a big debate on it today, but we've got to get on with the priorities of the people. And that's what we're doing. And
you think it's a storm in a Westminster teacup, is it?
No, those are your words.
Well, those are your words. So you don't think it's that? You do think it's serious?
I think, of course, I think it's serious and it's important. But I also think that we have massive issues that people expect us to address. And I think that people want us to get on with the job of taking the country forward, of making sure that we attract further investment. And this country is attracting record investment right now. It's a fantastic thing to see. And just as a result of this trip to India, you've got just today, you've got investment worth £1 billion pounds. Producing 11,000 jobs.
To be clear, though, Prime Minister,
tomorrow, what we're signing.
Yes.
Because you promised to get on with this.
I'm about to get to it, but if you let me finish this. Just to be clear, you said about the fine you had and the apology that you didn't realise that you had broken rules, that it was a genuine mistake. To be clear, at all times, even the Bring Your Own Bottle event in Number 10 Garden on May the 20th, at all times did you always think in every single event you were not breaking the rules, so you never thought you broke the rules in any circumstance?
You're asking me to comment on an ongoing investigation.
You said you had nothing to hide.
And I'm going to comment at the end of that investigation. I've been very, very clear about that. What I was saying is I don't shrink at all from having more parliamentary scrutiny, if that's what the opposition want. What I want to do...
MPs
what I want to do... Indeed. But what I want to do is focus on the things that matter, I think, to the future of the country, and that is making sure that we help people with the cost of their energy.
You accept your MPs are unhappy then?
Sorry, those are your words. I want to get on and deal with the priorities
one
of the
more question
of the
this, and then I want to ask you about the trade deal. You've had a torrid time.
Sorry, Beth,
Parliament,
how many
just this one more,
Go on.
and then you're having a torrid time. Do you really believe that the party, that the country will allow you to lead the Conservative Party into the next general election? Right here, right now, you're absolutely determined to do that.
Of course I am. And what I'm determined to do is to make sure that we continue with our agenda, which is to unite and level up. Don't forget, this is the government that gets done some very, very difficult things. We delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe. We came out of COVID faster than anybody else. We got Brexit done, and when people said it was impossible, and we've led the world in standing up to aggression. I think even you would concede, Beth, in standing up to aggression in Ukraine.
Finally,
and we will get on. We will get on with that work. And since you now come to the point of the trip, thank you very much. Let me just remind you that what we hope to do is a free trade deal with India by the autumn. I think it has great potential. You've already got things like UK medicines, UK food agreements have been done in advance. Apples, you'd be thrilled to know, are going to be able to come to this market in a way they haven't been able to come before, and much more besides. There is a huge amount that unites the UK and India.
But not Ukraine.
Look at, well, give you one example. The very vaccines I just mentioned are a classic example of collaboration between the UK and India. 1.5 billion people around the world vaccinated thanks to Kovid, which was basically an Anglo-Indian collaboration.
Right, Prime Minister, thank you
Beth.
so much.
Thank you.
Boris Johnson there. Well, the other interviews for the show I recorded back in London, coming up. Fighting to bring her father home. We hear from the campaigner Roxanne Tabhaz, who says her father Morad, who's been imprisoned by the Iranian authorities, has now been abandoned by the UK government. Welcome back. In March, the UK repaid a long-standing debt to Tehran, paving the way for the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashouri from prison in Iran. But the plane home had a passenger missing, the environmentalist Morad Tabhaz. His family say a pledge to bring Morad back to the UK was broken by the Foreign Office. Now they say they feel abandoned. I've been speaking to Roxanne Tabhaz, Morad's daughter. She's not just fighting for his release, but also her mother, who's been banned from travelling out of Tehran. During our interview, she told me about the toll the ordeal's taken on her family and her fears for her father. Roxanne, firstly, thanks for coming on the show and spending some time with us. I want to talk to you about your dad, Morad Tabhaz, who is still imprisoned in Iran. Can you tell us about your father's situation?
He's still in Evin, in the prison. He was meant to be on a furlough, which we still haven't seen come to fruition. And it's been now 5 weeks since the others returned. So I think he's feeling quite abandoned and a little bit hopeless, I think.
So there was a deal and you hoped your dad, Morad, would come home with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashouri, who are both now back in the UK, but your dad has ended up back in Evin prison where they were both incarcerated as well. How did he end up in this situation?
He was in Iran for his wildlife conservation efforts, and he got picked up in January 2018. But I think it came as a huge shock and surprise to all of us because he was there to help, really. And it was definitely something that I think hit all of us quite hard. We felt that there must have been a mistake or the messaging wasn't right, but it was really difficult to stomach. And it's been ongoing, so it's been over 4 years now.
And how did you discover your dad had been arrested?
We got a call from a family member to say that they'd just heard that he'd been taken. And my mum was put on a travel ban and she's still there as well.
So your dad was in Iran, was arrested. Your mum was there with him and is now on a travel ban.
Yeah.
And your dad has been in the same prison that Nazanin and Anousheh were in, and he's been there since 2018 or 2019. How does your dad sustain himself in there, keep himself sane? Do you get to talk to him?
He's always been a very positive person, so I think he tries to look for any sort of light, if you will, that he can. But yeah, I think anybody in those circumstances will struggle to have hope, really. It's a difficult one because anytime we've communicated to him, it's been through my mum, and she'll put two phones on speaker next to each other and we kind of shout across. But my dad's the ultimate dad, so he never lets on that he's having a bad day or that he's not feeling well. He's always asking about his children and how we are and if there's any news that we want to share with him. And and just to share I love yous and I miss yous, and we're here for each other, really.
But he's not very well, is he, your dad?
No, he had cancer some time ago and had quite a lot of health complications coming out of it, and a lot of those still require ongoing treatment and monitoring, so we do worry for him.
Has he still got cancer?
Well, we don't know. We don't really have a way to find out, really. Following the release of Nazanin and Anousheh, he found out that they'd come back. He was meant to be on furlough and was taken back to the prison. And on his return to the prison, he decided that he wanted the UK to know that he was still there and suffering, and that he felt betrayed and abandoned. So he started a hunger strike that went on 9 days, but I think it was really difficult for him even to give it up, because it was his one sense of, I think, control in a way.
As his child, I imagine you're not sure if he's still ill, he's not having any treatment, then he goes on a hunger strike. I mean, you must be desperately worried about him.
We are, but we have faith in him and his decisions, so we wanted to be supportive, but with more days that passed, we thought, you know what, that's why we have to be public now. We can't stay quiet anymore.
Your dad was put on furlough when Nazanin and Anousheh were released, which was meant to be that he was allowed to return home. And then 48 hours after they landed, he was sent back to prison and he started a hunger strike, which you asked him to stop. You were led to believe that your dad would get released as part of that same deal. Why did you believe that, and what happened?
The Foreign Office is, I mean, when I say the Foreign Office told us, they assured us that my dad and mum would be a part of any deal that they were constructing for the other two hostages. We were assured at every turn that he wasn't going to be left behind, that he would be a part of that, and we believed them.
When did you discover that your dad wasn't part of that deal that you'd been told he was part of?
We found out in the press when Nazanin and Anousheh were on the plane. So when it went live that they were coming back, we found out with the rest of the world through the media. I think the closest feeling I could describe is probably betrayal. We had 4 years of having faith in the government, and they abandoned us and they left him behind.
So you learnt about it by reading the press with everyone else. What did you do then?
Well, that's when we had to make a different decision. We'd always been advised by the Foreign Office to stay quiet and out of the media so that the negotiations wouldn't be negatively impacted. And we decided at that juncture maybe we need to change tact, because the other two families went public and they got their family members back.
That must have been, I imagine, quite personally hard that you had put your faith in the Foreign Office, that you hadn't, as Sherry, Anousheh's wife, and obviously Richard with Nazanin, that you hadn't publicly campaigned, although you'd clearly been working very hard to get your dad's release. Was that really hard, that you thought you'd made a mistake?
Yeah, it was, but at the time I don't think anyone can be prepared to be presented with this kind of situation, but we thought, it's the Foreign Office, it's England, surely they know. And, you know, we weren't in a position to go against their advice, because they, in theory, would have known better than anyone.
What about your MP as well? Because Tulip Sadiq had campaigned very vocally for Nazanin alongside Richard. What about your MP?
Felicity Bucknan. Because my home is in Notting Hill, so I'm Kensington and Chelsea. I think it's difficult because I'm his daughter, so he technically isn't her constituent. But again, everything gets funneled back to the Foreign Office anyway. So at this point, we're just kind of hoping that Liz Truss and Boris Johnson will really actually keep up with the promise they made to us and follow through on the deal that they presented to us.
You talked about your dad and his citizenship, because he has a triple citizenship. He is British, American and Iranian. He has 3 nationalities. Has that been a hindrance, do you think, in trying to get him released?
Initially, we didn't think it would be, because we would have thought that having UK-US, you'd be fully covered in theory. And now the answer that we're getting from the Foreign Office is that his situation's more complicated because he's also American, and the Iranians want to see him as American. It's a bit difficult to stomach because they can't decide that. You know, England knows who their citizens are. My dad was born here, he's British. They have his birth certificate. He was born in Hammersmith Hospital. He's from here. So I don't accept that excuse, really.
Anousheh said when I spoke to him, and Sherry said this, his wife as well, that because of the dual citizenship, because they had spent parts of their lives in Iran, that when they dealt with the Foreign Office, sometimes they felt that people questioned their Britishness and their citizenship. Is that how you have felt about your dad as well, that he's not quite British enough for them to care enough?
I think it's something that you always consider. My dad's American citizenship is from naturalization. He went to university there and decided to settle down there with my mum. But I don't think that makes him any less British.
Nazanin and Anousheh, they both care very deeply about your father and about his case. Anousheh was friends with your dad in Evin prison. He spoke about how he can't be at peace until your dad is also released. And Nazanin, who I think grew close to your mother in Tehran, also invited you to her first press conference to publicise your dad's case. Have they been a great source of strength for you and your family?
Nazanin spent quite a lot of time actually with my mum when she was on furlough, and they grew really close. And Richard really forged the way for us here. It's really, they're murky waters to navigate. It's challenging because you're carrying this huge weight with you, and everything you do and say has an impact in a different way in different scenarios. But it was Richard and Nazanin that chose to include us in their celebration to help us highlight my dad's case. And they've always been really encouraging about going public. And they've always invited us to be included on that. But because we were trying to follow the advice we were given, we were always very careful and stayed away from that. But when they found out that we were more open to it, they were the first ones to really help us kind of step out of the shadows and into the light and to help, really.
Your mum is also now in Iran. You're both your parents. You're the eldest of 3 siblings, and it's kind of fallen on you to publicise the case. You've also got your own life and your own job. I mean, it must be pretty hard going, isn't it?
It is, but I guess you find strength in quite broken places, and you surround yourself with people that can hold you up when you don't feel like you can stand, really. So I've been really lucky. I think that's why we're here today, and all the other press interviews and things we've done. There is that fear that if we don't stay public and we don't step forward, that they'll forget him and he'll be abandoned there for longer than he already has been.
Your dad is sentenced to 10 years in prison, and he's what, now in his late 60s?
Yes, 66.
Presumably your feeling is he just can't be there for that long. You have to get him out.
We do, and I think it's not even just physical health for anybody in that scenario, it's mental health as well. And they're both there. My mum's been sat waiting for ages, and if her travel ban was meant to be lifted the way his furlough was meant to happen, we still don't understand why she hadn't been then put on that plane so we could at least see her for a few days. She would have gone back anyway because her partner, her love of her life is there. She wait for him forever. they're high school sweethearts. You don't forget somebody like that in your life.
What's your message then to Liz Truss?
Bring them home. They promised us, and you know, if nothing else, they should have upheld the furlough that they publicly celebrated and announced, because you know, if it was decided, then it should happen. It's been 5 weeks and nothing's changed. There's been no update of any substantive background of any sort, and you know, we'd really like some answers, but also I'm really tired of words. We'd like to see some action now.
And just finally, do you think the US government can help get your dad out?
I think they've been working on it just as hard. The State Department and Foreign Office work in tandem, but again, this is home to him. This is who he is. So, and that was who promised us the results. The UK said to us that he was going to be in the deal.
And do you think you'll get him back?
I can't think about if I don't get him back, because he was, I mean, he is. You can't even say past tense or present tense anymore because it's so complicated. But when it's your dad, it's your dad. There's no love like the love a daughter or a son has for a father.
Stay with us, because coming up next, what lessons were learned in the pandemic? The former Health Secretary Matt Hancock joins me in the studio to discuss regrets, what he thinks the government got right, and what the future might hold for him. It's over 2 years since the first coronavirus lockdown. Since then, more than 170,000 people in the UK have lost their lives to Covid. Lessons we were told would be learned, and we'd be better prepared for future pandemics. But how possible is that with an NHS on its knees? Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, who was challenged with the biggest crisis that's faced the NHS since it was created. History and an upcoming inquiry into the pandemic will judge how well he handled that challenge. But earlier, he joined me in the studio to discuss regrets, what he thinks the government got right, and what the future might hold for him. Matt Hancock, thanks so much for coming on the show. We're just back from the Easter holidays, and I don't know about you, but when I was on my Easter break, it finally felt like life was back to normal, properly back to normal. Is the Covid pandemic finally over, do you think?
Yes, in this country. COVID's obviously endemic, meaning that it's everywhere and lots of people catch it. But, you know, every week they publish the statistics of how many people have got antibodies to protect you from COVID, and it's now over 99%. And that's great, and it means that we can have what is essentially a free existence here. But it's not over everywhere around the world. In fact, I think, you know, one of the really shocking things is watching how some of the countries that went for a zero COVID strategy at the start are now in real trouble negotiating their way to being, you know, part of the international community again.
The reason I'm asking you is because for the NHS, the sort of fallout, as you were saying, is still quite extreme for the NHS. I had a look at the stats before we sat down on April the 11th. There were 301 deaths and 40,000 cases. People on waiting lists for treatment, record levels of 6.2 million. A&E waiting times worst since records began. Trolley waits at record levels. I mean, I bet you're glad that this isn't your job to fix this anymore, huh? And crucially, the number of vacant hospital beds in England's lower than at any time since the start of the crisis. And you know that's a key measure of resilience.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had a close family member that needed NHS treatment against that backdrop, would you be worried about that?
Well, I think that fixing this is clearly critical, and there's a plan in place. The government put a plan in place to tackle this backlog. But, you know, a year ago, thinking about how to tackle the backlog post the pandemic was a priority. And then we had Omicron over last Christmas. And so it's obviously really serious, and it will take time to get through that backlog of things that were postponed. So that's why I say the pandemic's over, but we're still with the hangover and the impact on the NHS. And remember, the people who work in the NHS are tired as well.
They must be so tired.
So there's a big, it's a big challenge.
They're probably so tired that when you say as a former health secretary it's over, they might even feel a bit irritated by that, because they might be thinking, it's really not over for us. We're dealing with this still day in, day out.
Well, the consequences are still there, absolutely. But that's the difference between a disease being, pandemic, affecting everybody in our normal lives, and endemic as a bad disease, another flu.
Let's look back briefly on the... You've talked about this loads. There's an inquiry. You've given evidence to select committees. I don't want to go on and on about it, but you are here and you did live through it and you did do a lot of decision-making around it.
Yeah.
On the positive, the Vaccine Task Force has been widely praised, led by Kate Bingham. You, actually, by the Select Committee, were praised for personally taking charge of the testing system, although they were critical of test and trace.
Sure.
There's some of the couple of the successes. What do you think were the biggest mistakes? When you reflect back on it, what do you think, I wish I had done that differently?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of things that we need to learn from, both from the good and the bad. So it's really important to learn from the things that went well as well. It's a bit like after a football match, the team that wins, you win 2-1 and everyone says, wow, that was an amazing performance, everything went right. Well, yeah, except that
you let
a goal in. So let's learn from the successes as well. We can learn from the vaccination programme, getting external expertise in, including from business, from academia and clinicians. That team, absolutely brilliant. Also, completely giving them their head and saying, we want you to buy from around the world. We want you to... And basically, the price is less important because the saving to the economy of getting this right is so big. So there were a couple of big learning points from the successes. But there were areas that were problematic.
What's your biggest regret?
Well, one of the things I point to is some of the rules that were put in place, the way that they were interpreted on the ground, and that...
The restrictions, you mean?
Yeah, so, for instance, do you remember early in 2020, during the first lockdown, there were funerals that took place without their loved ones?
Yes, you regret that?
I do, because it was
a
incredibly upsetting. And that was because of... It wasn't the intention, but it was the consequence of the rules. And we saw that happen and we changed it. But nevertheless, you've got to be constantly...
Is that your biggest personal regret, do you think?
Well, that was one of them. But, the thing is, managing something as big as a pandemic, you're never going to get every decision right. Your aim is to get most decisions right, and especially when something is genuinely unprecedented.
And one thing I did want to ask you specifically on was the issue of care homes.
Yeah.
I know you've been asked a lot about it, but is that something now in retrospect you wish you had done differently, like discharging people into care homes without being tested?
No, I'm going to give you a different explanation of what happened, and I've obviously thought about this a lot.
Well, you've been asked, and it will be a big focus of the inquiry.
It will.
Sure.
And so what the evidence shows is that the number of infections that got into care homes from people being discharged from hospital was very, very low. So there's been
I've got here an estimated 25,000 people were discharged from hospitals into care homes without getting a test.
Well, that's when...
At the height of the pandemic in the spring 2020.
Yeah, so that's when there weren't tests widely available, before we'd managed to scale up the testing.
Yeah. That must be a regret, though, mustn't it? Isn't it?
Well, if you let me explain what actually happened rather than what is the narrative around this, because this is somewhere where the narrative is wrong, and it's really important we correct it and learn the right lessons, not the wrong ones. So around 2% of infections got into care homes through that discharge process. And part of the reason is that because there wasn't a test, everyone was put into isolation. So I can't, if you can come up with a better option of what to do with people who need to leave hospital and go back to their care home, putting everyone in isolation That was the policy. Now, the level of isolation will have been different in different care homes. The challenge, in terms of where the infection came from, is that everybody in the community, or lots of people were catching COVID, and inevitably people worked in care homes. But I didn't want to go and stand on that podium and effectively say that I'm terribly sorry this came from the staff who live in the community not knowing.
But it probably came from a mix, didn't it?
Well, so they've done the analysis and found actually the big change that we made that really affected this and meant that the likelihood of catching COVID in a care home was so much lower in the second wave was that we stopped people staff moving
between homes.
And that actually was a much, much bigger impact. So this comes back to the lessons piece. Yes, of course, one of the lessons is,
don't discharge people who haven't been tested.
Do you know what? I'm going to answer the question and then you can ask your next one, rather than you finishing my sentence.
I thought we were having a conversation, but OK.
Well, I'd love to have a conversation, but the conversation involves listening to the answer to my question, your question, right? So, so the point is this, right? That the policy of discharge involved everybody going into isolation because we didn't know whether they had COVID or not. The big impact that really protected care homes was when we said you can't work in more than one care home.
Yeah.
So one of the lessons we need to learn is you put that policy in place, right?
Yes.
And then the other, in terms of discharges, is you must have a testing system ready to go, because we had to build that from scratch. So those are the two lessons.
So that's fine, but so you do agree that that was a mistake to allow people to be discharged from hospital without being tested?
No, because
you're saying it's both things.
No, I'm saying it's that we didn't have the tests in place. So the lesson on that front is have the tests, be ready with a testing system ready to go. And the reason I'm sort of really clear on this point and emphatic about it is that leaving people in hospital longer than they need to be in hospital is also bad for them and bad for the people who otherwise need to be in hospital. So the discharge policy had an important merit behind it.
Yeah. Okay.
So what I really think on care homes, and what I hope is coming over, is that there is a narrative about what went wrong in care homes. Fundamentally, the narrative is wrong. And part of the job of the inquiry and part of the lessons learning exercise is to learn the right lessons, including from things that didn't go as well as they could have done.
Yeah, but that was the narrative we heard from a lot of care home bosses, wasn't it? That people were being discharged and bringing COVID
This is the point. This is why we're having
homes.
the discussion, because it's actually important to listen to the science and look at the evidence and learn the lessons from the science and the evidence, not say, well, because that was on the front page of the newspapers at the time, it must have been true, because that isn't actually what happened. The main thing that happened is that infections got in from the community.
We could spend a lot of time talking about this, because Dominic Cummings said that you told the PM anyone going into a care home would be tested. Even if you disputed that, you did tell the public there was a protective ring, and then people found that people were going that hadn't been tested. I take your point about staff as well.
OK, we can go through each of them.
I'm just saying, is it a regret? Or you seem to be saying that...
I'm saying that I think
it's not.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm saying no. So the point about Dom Cummings is, he's wrong. So that's not important. What is important is that we know as a society, next time there's a pandemic, because there will be one, we know how best to protect people in care homes. And if we learn the wrong lessons, then we will not do it next time as well as possible. And the thing I really care about is that the person in my shoes next time has like a manual on the
has a testing regime. So
but also more broadly than that, has a manual on the shelf that says, this is how you do it, because we didn't have that at all.
Yeah.
Except in some specific areas.
All of which will come out in the inquiry, which I think will be useful for everyone to get the facts out there.
Yeah.
Let's move on, though, because I would like to talk to you more about that, but I'm going to run out of time.
Okay.
So I want to talk to you about COVID casting a long shadow in other ways.
Yeah.
And specifically at the moment on the career of a Prime Minister who's now been fined by the police for attending a COVID event, an event that was deemed as breaching the rules. And he could receive more penalties. As you know, he's under investigation for other events, and there's been a number of fines people within Downing Street and government. But you don't believe the PM should resign over this. Why not?
Because I think that when you're looking at who should be the Prime Minister, you've got to look in the round. You've got to look at the big picture. On Covid, I think that we got the big calls right. And there's a war. And the Prime Minister is leading the international response to Vladimir Putin. And so you've got to look forward and you've got to take everything into account.
Does your position stay the same however many fines he gets or however much the public and the polling reflects an anger amongst the public? Does it change your view?
Of course I understand that anger, and the Prime Minister's apologised. And you've got to look at where we are now and what's happening now in the world. And, you know, we're in this phase of history where, you know, big things keep coming along. You know, we just sorted Brexit when the pandemic hit, and then we were just coming out of the pandemic when the war started, and we've got to make sure, what is in the national interest? And that is what matters right now.
And you are speaking as a politician and a loyal lieutenant to the Prime Minister, but it must resonate with you on a personal level too, because you did resign. You had a relationship with someone. It became public in a way that was obviously difficult for you and your families. You were found to have broken guidelines. You resigned. Do you feel bitter looking back about being exposed in that way and forced to resign, and you don't feel that there's a contradiction in the Prime Minister's behaviour? How do you feel about it on a personal level now? No,
I wasn't forced by anybody to resign. I chose to resign. And in a way it makes the point more powerfully that in the Prime Minister you have to look at who is best placed right now to be leading this country with the challenges that we face. And especially, the response to Vladimir Putin is the single most important international thing going on right now, and responding to the cost of living crisis domestically. And on the former...
people would also say that Prime Ministers have been changed at times during war, and we aren't actually directly at war in the UK.
But the Prime Minister...
this is a much rolled out reason,
it's much bigger than that,
but
right?
some of your colleagues would disagree with that.
Well, people disagree in politics. That's the nature of the thing, isn't it?
I'm just saying
that's in fact, I'd argue that in a democracy, the disagreement is the point. And some of our opponents strategically, who think that you should have an autocracy and not have disagreement, don't get the point that this cacophony of debate isn't a weakness; it's a strength. It's the point of politics. So of course people disagree with me, but that's
how you feel.
But how I feel about it is you've got to look what is in the national interest is. Essentially, Vladimir Zelensky's closest international ally, the guy who has played an absolutely leading role in ensuring the strategic response to Putin is not to split the West, which is what Putin wanted and I think expected, but to unite the West and most of the rest of the world in response.
Can I come back to your situation, because you had these photos leaked of you and Gina, who you're now in a relationship with, and the Information Commissioner's office has said there's not enough evidence to prosecute the people suspected of leaking that footage. It was in your private office. This was security. How do you feel about that? Do you just want it... Wow. Is it just done now?
I've said everything I'm ever going to say on that subject. So...
Do you want them to be prosecuted? Do you just...
I'm just absolutely not going there.
You're not going to go there, OK. And Matt Hancock, to finish off, you came into Parliament in 2010. You became a minister, I remember it, in 2012. You were in the Cabinet by 2018. And then you had this massive bump in the road for your career that wasn't just political but also personal. Did you sort of think about just packing it in and doing something else and beginning a new life in a different career, rather like your mentor, George Osborne, did after 2015. Did you give that some thought?
Well, obviously, when something huge happens like that, you think about, everything across the board. But the other thing is, I've got a job to do representing my constituents, and I love doing that. And I've been able to spend far more time on it in the last year than I did before. And also, being in Parliament is a real privilege. You have a platform to talk about and make changes on areas you really care about. So take the campaign that I'm running on dyslexia. I'm dyslexic.
And didn't find out until you were at university.
Exactly.
I don't know how you got to Oxford...
Based on maths, basically.
But you basically got to Oxford University not knowing that you were dyslexic.
Yeah, but thankfully I'm very good at maths, so I appreciate how I'm one of the lucky ones who got through. But still, 1 in 5 dyslexic kids, only 1 in 5, get identified at school, and we've got to change that. And the department have now made some changes and put out a green paper about this. And so, that is, making change from the backbenches on a subject I really care about, personally affects me, and I wasn't able to do because I was in different ministerial roles in government. And so, I love doing that. Other former cabinet ministers said to me after I resigned, they said, the problem is going to be, you're going from your time being programmed out to every 5 minutes. Sometimes my loo breaks were programmed into the diary.
Were your loo breaks actually written in? No, really. I actually want to know this.
Not every day, but on busy days.
Was it literally written in?
On busy days, yeah.
The Secretary of State can go for a comfort break.
Yeah. And
5 minutes.
And then back at your desk. And then going to having a lot more freedom in how you use your time. I've really enjoyed that, and I've been able to choose how I spend my time.
One more thing, you talked a lot about the Prime Minister and Ukraine. Number one, you think he'll be the Prime Minister by the end of the year still? You don't think?
Oh, yes. I think he'll lead
You don't think there will be a confidence vote? You don't think your colleagues might try and unseat him?
That's right.
You don't think that will happen?
I do not think that will happen.
Well, Matt Hancock, thank you for coming on, and I imagine I will see you back in Cabinet, certainly before you hit 50. What do you think?
I'm just enjoying life on the backbenches.
All right, thank you very much. Well, that's all for today's show. And later, you'll be able to get the Beth Rigby Interviews podcast with the highlights of this show and some extra bits too. That'll be on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts.